Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is April 29th, 2015. I am Carol Fowler, Director of the Center. My honored veteran is Ted Zabohonski, who served with the United States Army in the Vietnam War. He served from July of 1967 until February of 1969 and was with the 129th Assault Helicopter Company, 1st Aviation Brigade. Thank you so much for wanting to be here today, Ted. Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution to our Veteran Oral History Project here at the National Guard Militia Museum. And good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Tell us how you heard about the project.
One of your representatives had visited Rolling Thunder meeting recently, and he had met with Bob Rivers, one of our members who's on the board of directors, and Bob and he presented the opportunity, and so I just thought I would take you up on the offer, and here I am.
Oh, thank you so much, and for making the trip. And I want to take us back to life prior to service. Had anybody in your family served before you?
No, my father was unable to serve, although I'm sure he would have been a good soldier if he was physically able. But most of my neighbors, my friends' dads, had served either in World War II or Korea. And so we were, it was all around us. And I saw myself as fulfilling my duty as an American citizen, and that's kind of how I proceeded into being drafted. Actually, I pushed up my number, which put me in a infantry training situation, and about 10 weeks into advanced infantry training in Fort Polk, my knee was injured, and so they moved me over into a clerk typist role.
Oh, I see.
But I jumped ahead. You were asking me about prior to the service.
You were a telephone man. You were 19?
Right. And I got a job with New Jersey Bell Telephone when I graduated high school in 1966. And I was working there when I was drafted.
Okay. Were you the only son?
No, my older brother Pete was a member of National Guard at the time, and my brother Frank also joined the National Guard in around that time.
We should probably talk about July of '67, Newark.
Right. The day I was drafted was the day that the Newark riot had begun. And
you lived there?
Well, I lived in East Newark, and our reporting location for pre-induction was Kearney, New Jersey. And from there we were put on a bus to go to the Newark Induction Center. But because the riot had begun, the bus driver just took us across the Passaic River, and then we had about a mile walk down Broad Street to the induction center.
That's incredible.
And while...
what did the bus driver say?
He said, "This is as far as I go."
He didn't want rocks thrown at the windows?
Right. And it was, there was tear gas in the air, and you could hear shots being fired, and stores were blazing, and people were looting. And when the state police saw about 30 young men walking down the street, they thought we were there looking for trouble, but we told them we were reporting to be drafted. And once we got into the induction center, the riot actually intensified, and I guess the whole process of induction took 3 to 4 hours. And by that time, the focus of the rioters was at the front of the induction center, and so the administrators had put a couple of buses up front as though we were going to get in those buses. And there must have been hundreds of us at that point. There must have been 300 being inducted. And so they lined us all up in front of the front windows where we could be seen, and it appeared as though we were going to go on these buses in the front. And then the sergeant said that when he gave the word, everybody was to run out the back door, and they had buses waiting for us back there, and they drove down Raymond Boulevard to avoid what was going on outside.
And decoy buses in the front, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. And so, we left our hometown in flames, and I didn't realize it until a little while later that my brother Pete had been activated, and he was deployed in Newark for the riot, and he was there for a couple weeks while I was in basic training.
You must have been worried for your family.
Well, there was a lot of that going on, sure. People were very concerned as to how the riots might spread, and people were forming little militias in their neighborhoods to protect friends and family and
Businesses,
whatever.
yeah.
And so, it was a very heady time. A lot of people were very nervous about what was going on, and it was odd to be pulled away from that and to go into basic training at that time.
So really your baptism by fire was trying to walk down to the induction center.
To some extent it was. It was an eye-opener. I had never seen a riot before, and hope to never see one again. But that was the way it happened.
And no bullets came to East Newark?
No. In the immediate aftermath of when I was inducted, and I had spoken to my dad and different other people when I got back, the bridge tenders were made to open the bridges of the Passaic River such that people couldn't come from the Newark side of the river over to East Newark and Harrison and Kearney.
Interesting.
And so it kind of mobilized their defenses in that way. And nothing ever came of it, fortunately.
Interesting. So in those 2 weeks, you weren't able to be in contact with your brother Pete?
Right, yeah. There was, in basic training, you got a little time off on Sunday, and you can make a phone call. And I guess I probably did, but I don't remember the specifics of it. And I knew that Pete had been deployed, and I knew that he was okay. But as far as any particulars, I didn't find out any of that until later on.
We didn't talk about how, you didn't have a choice of branch of service.
Right. When I moved up my draft number, I was drafted by the Army.
Right. And you didn't want to enlist in any other branch before that?
The fact that an enlistment was 3 years minimum, I wanted to get in and get out and get on with life, and so 2 years sounded better, but I should have known better. They fast track you for the infantry when you move up your number.
What does that mean?
So when as the draft would go on, numbers would come up in the routine way.
Based on your birthday?
Right. But you could move your number up, send a request to the draft board to put you at the top of the list. And once you did that, you'd be guaranteed to be inducted within about 6 weeks or so. And then, based on you passing the physical and all, then, you'd be drafted.
And you talked about patriotism earlier?
Well, I think patriotism has always played a role in my life. I love this country, and I really feel that we owe gratitude to those who serve. Not especially me. My duty was routine and was not dangerous. But a lot of people sacrificed everything to keep this country free. That sounds, may sound naive, but I believe in that today.
Oh, it's well said. All right, let's go back to basic training. How much of an adjustment was it for you?
Well, it's major because, whatever you had become used to at the age of 19 was out the window, and everything that you did, eat, sleep, everything, was dictated by the training regimen. And
Where was that?
that was in Fort Dix. We were in the barracks that was closest to the McGuire Air Force Base hangars, and the stockade. And so I guess we were in training for about 6 weeks or so, and it was a Sunday morning, and everybody woke up coughing and choking. There was a riot in the stockade, and they tear gassed the stockade, and that was so close to us it drifted over into our barracks, and so we all got a rude awakening that Sunday morning. And
Was there any medical care?
no, it was, I got gassed a few times in the Army just because they wanted you to taste it and experience it and know what tear gas was.
But by then you had a gas mask, or?
No, we had, in basic training, we would be issued gas masks, but we didn't have them at the ready for, this event.
Was that when you had to run through a field that had tear gas in it?
No, the experience that I had with tear gas in basic training, they had built a little, for lack of a better description, a little house, a one-room deal that had very little ventilation, and as I recall, the cadre would stand in there in a gas mask, and they had, it looked like a candle, but it was a training tear gas method. And so you'd walk in and all you could see is this little flame burning, but it was putting out tear gas. And you'd walk in with your gas mask on, and then you'd have to remove it and say your service number and a couple other things so that they would know that you had to breathe in the tear gas. And then after about 30 seconds or so, when they knew that you got a good dose, they would let you run outside and heave or whatever it was that you had to do. And
Wow.
and then when I was in Vietnam, there was an incident where some of our air crews did not have their gas masks with them, and the Korean infantry used some tear gas on a landing site. When the helicopters came in, the crews were not disabled, but they were impacted by the gas, and so the executive officer decided that we had to have gas training and make sure everybody's gas mask was operational.
Were your DIs Vietnam veterans?
Oh, this was in Vietnam at the time. Most of the drill instructors had been to Vietnam. Most of the cadre were Vietnam veterans. But in this incident, we were in Vietnam, and the test for everyone's gas mask. So everybody's supposed to report down to the central area of the compound. They put up a GP small tent, which is pretty small, and they put for the first effort. They put about 30 of us into this little tent, and you could shoulder to shoulder, and then the officer threw a tear gas grenade in there,
Oh, no.
and it just moved all the oxygen out of the space, and so all of a sudden, people were coming out from under the tent flaps, and just exiting everywhere, and the tent was kind of moving around, and it got collapsed in the chaos. And then they decided to do that a little differently moving forward. So, anybody that was a part of that got a huge dose of gas. And then they modified that, and so they got to test the gas masks and made sure that the crews were carrying them into landing zones and pickup zones so that they wouldn't have an incident similar to the one that they had.
Do you have any other stories from basic training?
Basic.
Fort Dix?
Yeah, it was very hot. It was July. The heat was incredible, and the training was rigorous. You started to see a little bit of anti-war sentiment at the time. Fort Dix being an open base, people could drive on that base at the time, and one of the fellas' moms would come to training every morning.
Oh, no.
And this poor kid, I mean, between his mother and the drill sergeants, I'm pretty sure that he eventually got out on like a mental discharge or something, because he was so determined not to serve. And then with his mother showing up, he didn't complete the cycle with us. He was recycled, and I think it was probably, he probably never stayed in the service. But
what would his mother do?
she would just go there, and she would be taking pictures of the training. She would be confronting the drill sergeants, and then the MPs would come and escort her away, and she would protest and whatnot. But it was
What, like she had big signs and stuff?
no signs. There's I think his name was Cheriaco. We always called each other by the last name.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Cheriaco's mom, and. Well, God bless her. She was fighting for her son,
Right.
And maybe she did some good in that. Maybe she saved him. I don't know.
Yeah, we'd never know.
But otherwise, basic training was kind of what you would expect.
I thought you mentioned infantry before. with
Well,
fast track.
at the end of basic training, we were all given our assignments, and I was one of two people in our company that got assigned to Fort Polk, Louisiana for advanced infantry training. And Fort Polk, the facility there was called Tigerland. And when you arrived there, the first thing they did when you got off of that bus was, the drill sergeant there said, anybody that doesn't think they're going to Vietnam can forget that idea right now. Everybody here is going to Vietnam, so learn what we're going to teach you well. And it was a lot of indoctrination and, of course, physical training. And
Did you ever think why you were chosen out of so many?
well, I think because I pushed up my draft number. And so they identify people that do that as gung-ho, evidently.
Okay.
And I guess I was gung-ho. And so anyway, my experience of advanced infantry training lasted about 10 weeks, and my knee started clicking and giving me a lot of pain, and I went to the dispensary, and they took me out of the infantry and put me into Remington's Raiders. It was a clerk typist operation.
What did they find with your knee?
Well, I had 2 surgeries prior to service, and so it was, I had 2 knee surgeries, one on each knee, and it was aggravating the left knee, all of this physical training. And so once the physical training was reduced, we were running, I don't know, they told us 5 to 7 miles in the morning and again in the evening, and everything in between was rigorous. You would run every place. You had to wear your steel pot at all times, and the training was extraordinary. And I'm sure it benefited the people who got through the entire process. and made him a better soldier. But I was not a part of that at that point. I went on to the Remingtons, Raiders, and then was an Army-trained typist.
How did you feel about that?
Well, I was a little disappointed because I guess I started to understand the significance of the combat infantryman's badge. And I thought I would want to be awarded that at some point. And now reflecting upon it, I'm glad I didn't, because the what you would have to go through to get that award is probably, some things you're just better off not experiencing, I guess. And so anyway, I was a little disappointed that I was no longer in the infantry, but then upon reflection, relieved, because it just it put me in a position to go to the 129th, which was good duty.
And then where did you go from Tigerland?
Okay, so we I guess it was like December 15th of '67. I was sent home on leave from Tigerland, and then I had to report to Oakland, California on the 28th, I believe, 28th or 29th, for processing to Vietnam.
So you got to be home for Christmas?
No, I was not home for Christmas. I had to leave, got my dates a little mixed up. I left like two days before Christmas, and by the time I got to Oakland, as you can imagine, it was the days between the holidays, and so not much was really happening except you're getting transported, and then when you got to a facility, you might not get processed as efficiently as you would in a normal weekday. And so that they kind of held us over in Oakland for a couple of days. At one point, they gave us leave. It was the last work day before New Year's in San Francisco. At that time, everybody would empty wastebaskets and everything out of the skyscraper windows. And so we were given leave, and so it would have been the Friday before the New Year's holiday, and the waste paper was like up to your knees in certain areas. It was like snowdrifts all through the canyons of business in San Francisco, and so the taxi driver explained to us that this was a tradition at that time. And so we spent an evening, got some Chinese food in Chinatown, got back to base, and then a day or so later, transported to Long Bin on commercial jets. We left. I guess we took off out of San Francisco. It might have been a Continental Airlines, and they had regular stewardesses and such, and air crew. And then, but it was all, there was only soldiers on it was a charter flight. And when we arrived in Long Bin after, it's like a 24-hour flight, stop over in Hawaii for about an hour, and then on to Long Bin, somewhere around the Philippines. We hit this terrible turbulence that seemed like it would tear the wings off the plane. The stewardesses got knocked to the floor, but no harm done really. We got into Long Bin, and it was nighttime, and I had never seen a sky that was only lit by flares. The base was on a higher alert than normal, and I don't know if there was incoming or any such thing. But anyway, we landed, and there's this eerie yellow light in an otherwise very dark place. And the plane taxied in the dark. They weren't using their lights or anything, to a point on the airfield where they said that there was a high alert, and that we were to get off the plane and get to the side of the runway and get down in the ditch.
Wow.
So doors open up, there's a gangway, everybody empties out, gets into these ditches, while there was, say, 200 soldiers who were now going home, coming up the gangway. And they were as happy as anything, and they were yelling epithets at us, newbies being, and so we're all scared out of our minds while these guys are all happily going home. And so, then they rounded us up and got us to barracks pretty quickly.
Because you weren't armed, right?
No. Right, you just arrived there in a pair of fatigues, and then you started your whole process of, how to get to your eventual duty station.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have the unit history here of the 129th Assault Helicopter Company. How long were you in Long Bin for?
Probably about 2 days, and then I was assigned to the 1st Aviation Brigade. That's all I knew at that point. And I was sent up to Nha Trang. It's Central Highlands on the coast. Beautiful little city, actually. And at Nha Trang, I spent about 3 days. They kept me there to paint a building. And so I painted this building.
Just you?
There was a couple of us on the detail.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, I ran into a friend of mine from high school there. And so he said, well, why don't you join us tonight? We're going to go over to NCO Club. And that sounded pretty good to me, so I met up with George. And
what was your rank?
At the time, I was, I didn't know I was a PFC, because nobody ever handed me a piece of paper, or I never saw a raise in my pay that told me I was an E3. So I really, I had no insignia on my sleeves. And fast forward just a moment here, I got up to the 129th, still not knowing that I had been promoted to PFC. And when one of the junior officers saluted me, and he realized that I was not an officer, then he got all bent out of shape, and then next thing I knew, I got a stripe after the fact. But anyhow,
so let me figure this out. You were saluted because you went to the NCO Club?
well, because I had nothing on my sleeves, and if in that situation, if you didn't see insignia on the sleeve, you assumed that it was an officer, with insignia on their collar. Some officers didn't wear insignia because they didn't want to be singled out.
That's right.
But in that particular instance, he was new and confused. I was new and confused. But when he realized that he was saluting a
PFC.
undesignated E3, you know what I mean? Because I didn't have my rank on my sleeve.
I take it you didn't salute back?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I wasn't sure what to do because an enlisted man would never be returning a salute. He would initiate a salute.
Oh, okay.
And then when the officer returned the salute, then you could release your salute. But anyhow, I was all new to all of this, and it was just minor point of confusion. So I arrived there as an E3 and assigned to the supply room. And when...
In the train?
No, this would be in... from Nha Trang, I was sent up to Tuiwa.
Could you spell that?
Tuyhoa. It's probably in that paperwork I had given you. But Tuiwa was where the
Oh, I see it.
the 1st Aviation Brigade was headquartered. And so when I got up there, they assigned me to the 129th. And so I spent like one day in Tuiwa and then down to the 129th, assigned to the headquarters platoon and in logistics, in the supply room. And so after a very short while, when the supply officer saw my typing skills, there was an opening in the arms room, and so they made me a company armorer because I really couldn't type efficiently.
Oh.
And so I became the company armorer because the little infantry training I did have familiarized me with a lot of weapons and such. And so it was a pretty good fit for me, and it was great duty, all things considered.
Were you in Quinlan?
Quy Nhon.
Quinlan.
Quy Nhon is the coastal city in the Central Highlands, and if you drove about 15 miles west of Quy Nhon, you would arrive at a little village called Ansan, and our base was Lane Airfield in
What airfield?
Lane, Lane.
Was it named after someone? Or
I believe it was. I believe a former deceased member at 129th. I think that's where Lane Airfield got named.
And it's an Army airfield.
Right. Specifically for the 129th, and then there was the 384th Chinook Company, and we had a dust-off 398th. I don't remember the number, but a medical evacuation company. And so those three units, along with a what they call a Pathfinder detachment. Pathfinders would establish landing zones and pickup zones. They would go in before the troops were landed, and then, so a Pathfinder would be the first ones into a landing zone, and then the last ones out of a pickup zone, because they were coordinating the helicopter movements. And so eventually I had gotten involved with the Pathfinders, and I assisted them carrying a radio, this kind of thing, when we had some bigger missions requiring additional help.
In Quinlan, you were supporting the Capital Republic of Korea Infantry Division?
Well, the ROK, they call it ROK, R-O-K, Republic of Korea, and they had two divisions in Vietnam. The Tiger Division was the one that we supported, and the White Horse Division was further south, and but anyway, the South Korean government did put in a substantial support effort.
Did you have personal contact with them?
Yes.
Can you describe how they were?
They were very gung-ho. These, within our perimeter, the South Koreans had an infantry detachment that...
As opposed to Iraq Marines?
Well, they were assigned defense of our perimeter if necessary. And so they would kind of stay in their own area. We would perform all the normal security tasks, guard duty and such, patrols. But the Korean Tiger Division, that detachment was there to, in the event that we were attacked or something, I guess they would spring into action. But because they were on our post, they made a show of their physical prowess every morning. The whole detachment would run around the perimeter, and the sergeant in charge would beat the last man in line with a swagger stick on his helmet usually, but whoever was last was made to run faster, and then whoever fell behind would get, and so that's how they ran around this perimeter every day, showing off their gung-ho spirit.
Oh, okay.
And they were good guys, and we had gotten together with them. I understood no Korean. They understood very little English, but there was still a bond of friendship there, and we would play volleyball with them, and we would bring them ice cream. And first time I ever tasted kimchi was made by this detachment. It was awful. I've had it since, and it's pretty good. But
it's supposed to be really healthy.
Well, yeah, very hot.
Oh,
and
okay.
I learned how to say water in Korean quickly after I had tried some of their kimchi.
That's funny.
But yeah, so it was it was a well-protected base, ensconced within the
What was the
Korean
typical day like for you? Company armorer? That's
Right.
separate from logistics, right?
Well, it was a portion of the logistics, and so the supply room, aside from all the boots and blankets and fatigues and all the normal things that you would associate with the supply room, in the back of that room there was we called it the cage, and it was screened in with like cyclone fence. So that nobody could just walk in there and take anything. And so it was secured to some extent. And it had a couple of, they called them Connex at the time, shipping containers, sticking off the back of it. And so that's where we kept the weapons that we would issue to new recruits, the ones we took back from people who were departing the company, and any captured weapons. And so that was my job, was to keep track of all that.
You kept records?
Right. And so when a new person showed up in the company, if they were, they were assigned to headquarters platoon, I would issue them an M14 rifle and, just write down the serial number, their name, and then when they were leaving, they were expected to turn that in. Flight crews would either get a .45 caliber pistol or a .38 caliber. That included the officers. And
what were you issued?
well, because I was the company armorer, I had a .45 and a M79 grenade launcher.
Wow.
And but anything I wanted, really, because it was all up for grabs. We had submachine guns. We had a lot of World War II stuff that found its way into Vietnam and then got captured and ended up in the arms room.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So.
Did you ever wonder how it got there?
Well, I guess, logically, the French were still in Indochina after the Second World War, and so these weapons would have been a part of the French Army issue, I imagine, if not via the French Army. I'm sure there's a very healthy black market at the time for reselling World War II surplus in whatever form, and weapons would be a part of that.
Okay. So let's go back to how you described the sky over Long Bin. When did you next see activity like that?
Well, after I got to the 129th, shortly thereafter, Tet Offensive happened, and the skies were lit up all night for several nights, there was an attack on a ammunition depot in the Quin Yan area, and that thing burned and exploded for a couple of nights. And so there was a lot of flare activity. In fact, she wasn't my wife at the time, but Eleanor had sent me a book, The Graduate. And I was on guard duty during that period, and I read that book by flare light all night. So, it was pretty brightly lit. And as far as the Tet Offensive goes, we had operations that addressed it, but we were never directly attacked in Tet.
What were you guarding?
Our perimeter. And so each...
But the Koreans were guarding...
they played a secondary role on our perimeter. So they had a huge base, and then not within their perimeter, but adjacent to them was us. And so, we could count on them for a level of support if necessary, but otherwise we took care of our own needs security-wise. And so we had guard towers, and, every day and night, we had people in those guard towers to assure our security.
And also the ammo dump got hit, and how did that affect your job with the weapons?
Well, my job didn't change all that much, except I was called in for other tasks, one of which we had an ammo dump on our base, and they needed a lot of 3.75-inch rockets that the UE helicopters carried. We had two kinds of helicopters. One was called a slick, which is a troop mover, and the other was called a gunship, which had rocket pods and grenade launchers and machine guns and whatever. And they were for, it was like airborne artillery, if you will. And so we needed a lot of rockets, and we needed people to put the warheads on the rockets, and so I was doing some of that at that time. And it's funny because my friend Harvey came up in this where, because we were both in the headquarters platoon, when the first sergeant was looking for volunteers, he'd usually started there. And so I got caught up, and first sergeant told me that I was going to be on rocket duty, which meant, putting on these warheads.
Was it dangerous?
Well, I don't know of anybody that was injured in that process, but you have this like 7-pound warhead that is a high explosive. Attached to a rocket that's set off by, I think they said it was, the trigger mechanism was like a half a volt or something. So I don't know. We did have rockets that would occasionally misfire and go across the airfield or whatever. And but the danger was there, but it wasn't imminent. And so anyway, when the first sergeant had seen me, he volunteered me for this, and so I was going back up to change into fatigues to report for duty, and my friend Harvey was up there in our hooch at the time, and I didn't want to tell a lie, but I said to him, I said, Harvey, I said, the first sergeant would really like to see you. And he goes, what? I said, I'm just telling you, I know that the first sergeant would like to see you. And I said, I got to go do rocket duty. So he said, oh, damn it. And he's moaning and groaning. And this kid Kemp he was there too. I said, he wants to see you too, Kemp. I said he would like to see you. And so both of these guys are mowing. And so I reported, and then the first sergeant's standing there, and there's about 7 or 8 of us ready to go up to the ammo dump. And around the corner comes Harvey and this kid Kemp. And the sergeant's eyes lit up when he saw Harvey. He said, Hirsch, get on the truck, you're going to... And this kid Kemp reacted so quickly, he made a U-turn and disappeared before the sergeant ever saw him.
Oh, how
he got away with it somehow, but then Harvey was so pissed at me for
setting him up.
He says, you lied. I said, I never lied, Harvey. I said, I told you that the first sergeant would like to see you, and I said, his eyes lit up when he saw you. So anyway, that was the relationship with Harvey.
Right.
And to this day, it's still kind of, like that.
Did he ever get you back?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one night, my bed was full of giant water bugs. These things were massive, and he never admitted to doing it, but I think he may have had something to do with that, because I got in there and tucked in my my mosquito net, and a few seconds later, all of a sudden, these giant water bugs are emerging out from under my blankets and all over me, and needless to say, I got out of there quick.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that might have been a Harvey move.
Right.
But I got him, and we, it was always that kind of, back and forth with me and him.
So why didn't arming the rockets, why wasn't it a good job? Or?
Well, it was a dirty job, and it was heavy lifting, and, you would fill a deuce and a half with these rockets, and it was, a few hundred rockets.
It was like hard labor.
Oh, yeah.
I see.
And it was just one of those extra duties. If you could get away with just doing your job, that was one thing. But, you would get volunteer for other things, and then, you find yourself caught up in some unanticipated situation.
So was your base ever overrun?
No.
That's good. What was a typical day like for you?
Well, it would start off with, breakfast. Then, I'd go to the arms room, and I would repair weapons that needed it, take weapons in, issue weapons. If there was, if that activity wasn't necessary for whatever reasons, then, I'd help out with other activities. One of the things I became pretty good at was when there'd be an unusual logistical request, some part that just needed to be gotten, you could expedite that. And so by driving to different depots in the area, I could expedite delivery of some part that was needed on the flight line or wherever it might be. And so, I would find myself on the road often doing that kind of thing. Carol, could we just...
Okay, we were talking about, I think we were talking about your friend, or we were talking about...
Well, a typical day in the life.
Yes. And
so, I've often heard the comment that combat or war is many hours of boredom and a few minutes or seconds of extreme excitement. And so, for a lot of the people that I was stationed with, and myself included, you were kind of putting in your time, and the routine activities, they did become kind of boring, and I'm fortunate for that, because there was a lot of people that weren't bored at all, and put in some difficult situations, but I was fortunate.
That's good. So the times when you would do guard duty, were you on stressed at the time, or you coped with it well?
It was more about trying to stay awake and perform your duty as you're supposed to, and not everybody was like that. And so it would depend on your circumstances. On one occasion, I was, you're always teamed up with another individual, and then one had to sleep while the other was awake and vice versa. And so...
For the one night in the guard tower.
Right, and so you get up into this guard tower, and the fellow that you were with, if you went to sleep and he went to sleep,
Oh, right.
you wouldn't know. But if the sergeant and the guard caught on that, both people were sleeping, well, then I guess people are accusing each other of whatever. And, that never came up, but it got close on one occasion when I was assigned guard duty with this young man named Wallace. And he had a bad reputation for insubordination and such. But anyway, here we were going down to guard duty, and as we're, you take your M60 machine gun and your ammo and your small arms, whatever, and you head down. And so he peeled off, and he went to wherever he went to get high or whatever it was that he was up to. And so I was alone in the tower. And the sergeant of the guard that night, he was a difficult guy, I'll just say that. But he and I had some words about this assignment with Wallace, because I knew that when I fell asleep, Wallace would go to sleep, and we would find ourselves in that situation. But without getting into any details with the sergeant, I just told him that I'd rather he assigned someone else with me, and he didn't like that at all. It was, like I was second guessing him or something.
So you didn't want to tell him that Wallace wasn't with you in the tower?
And so I'm up in the tower, and it's getting a little late. Maybe it's 11 o'clock or so. And I hear a noise out on the road. And so I'm trying to see what this is. And I noticed that the Jeep, Sergeant's Jeep, with no lights on, the engine's not running, he's rolling down the hill, and you could hear the gravel crunching under the wheels. He's rolling down real slow, like stealthy, sneaking up on me. And so I think, okay, well, I could play this game too. And so he positions that Jeep real quietly, and then he's sneaking over to the ladder, and this tower, I guess, is 25 feet up. And so I hear him getting on the ladder, and he's coming up real slow. He's going to catch me sleeping. And so I took the M60 off the front of the tower, and I moved it around so that when he came up, he would be looking at the machine gun. And I didn't challenge him, which the normal method would be when you detected somebody, you would challenge him immediately. So I just thought I'd challenge him when he got up to the top of the ladder, which is what I did. And
you have to ask for a password or something?
Well, I just slammed the bolt home and yelled halt, and his eyes almost popped out of his head, and he almost fell off the ladder. And then he got up into that tower, and he and I had words. And
you were by yourself?
Right. And then he started to question where the missing Wallace was, and so I can't account for him. He just never showed up. And so, it was just this ugly incident that I guess never really needed to happen. But, just one of those things.
Was it your fault?
Right. It was a series of circumstances that should have never evolved as far as that,
So did Wallace get in trouble? In the stockade?
I don't think so. He ended up, he had a fight with a fella, and I can't remember that fella's name, but a knife was involved, and Wallace got a severe cut to his arm. and then he was medevaced. I never saw him again.
Oh, I see.
But it was good riddance as far as I was concerned, because the guy, he didn't want to be there, and you don't want to be with somebody that don't want to be there, I guess.
Right, everyone either takes pride in their job or they don't, so.
Right, exactly.
So how long were you in Quinnan?
Well, I stayed the whole time in Lane Airfield, and our company
Anson.
had arrived in Ansan. I guess it was 9 months before I arrived, and they were there. It could have been, I think, probably through to the end of the war.
But your time was there for just 1 year, right?
Well, it was 13 and a half months, because when I came up on my rotation date, the Army had offered a 5-month early out for anyone who extended their tour. And so, based on that calculation, if I extended my tour for another 2.5 months, then when I rotated out of Vietnam, I would be sent home, which is what I did.
Wow. Do you have any other stories from when you were there? Did you get packages from home?
Yeah, we did, and it was always nice to get a package from home. The time it took to get there was kind of crazy. Could be a month before a package would arrive, and then oftentimes, well, on at least one occasion, my package was filled with red ants.
Oh no!
It had been sitting someplace, and the ants got in there, and so that was destroyed.
I never heard that. That's horrible.
But
and mail too, right? You got?
right, and I wrote my wife just about every day, and well, she wasn't my wife at the time,
Right.
and she wrote me just about every day, and so we had a steady flow of correspondences like that.
So that really helped morale for you.
Yeah, if she didn't save the letters, and I might have a few somewhere around, but basically, you run out of things to talk about, but it's just about when you're going to get home and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Are you ready to discuss your homecoming or your travel out of Vietnam? How that felt flying out of there?
Well, when my date of return came up, it was back to Long Binh, and then to SeaTac Air Base in Washington, and they put me in a new uniform, and they told me that when I got home I shouldn't be walking around in that uniform anymore, because there was these incidents that were happening. But I never had an ugly incident on the civilian side. I just remember when I landed at Newark Airport, and my soon-to-be, well, not so soon, but my wife-to-be, met me, and I just remember when that plane taxied up to the terminal, I didn't want to get off the plane. I sat there until the plane was empty, and then I did get off, but there was just something about arriving back home that, I don't know, it wasn't what I expected. I thought it would be, I thought I would have a different reaction, but I just didn't want to get off that plane for whatever reason. I still don't understand that, but
You still needed to decompress.
I guess so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think the support from your girlfriend at the time, Eleanor, your
Mhm.
wife now, I think that would have helped you. decompress?
Oh, sure, yeah, and yeah, it was all really good. Her parents had saved my Christmas presents and everything from the Christmas. Well, I missed 2 Christmases, and so they had a little something for me with that, and it was all really very nice. Getting back into civilian life, it was pretty easy for me. I had my job waiting for me,
Oh, that's awesome.
and
Where were you discharged from?
the actual discharge comes years after.
Oh, you're in the reserve?
But yeah, at SeaTac, I was processed out of active military, and then you're in the reserve for a number of years.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so, at the end of that, I guess it's a 6-year hitch, and after that 6th year, they sent me my discharge.
So what do you do during your reserve time? Do you go to drill or anything?
There was none of that.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have to be active reserves at all. And in fact, it was made clear that the stateside Army was really not interested in having Vietnam veterans hanging around unnecessarily. That was the reason for the 5-month early out, because you would bring a Vietnam veteran stateside and then put him where for 5 months or 6 months until his duty was completed. And so it wasn't good for morale at the time for Vietnam vets to be mixing in with the regular Army.
Oh, I see. I thought you were talking about the National Guard.
Well, or the National Guard, but there was an abundance of soldiers. And I think one of the things that's missing today, in fact, is at that time, each family had skin in the game, in the sense that there was a family member who may or may not be drafted, or, all the families were invested in the military to some extent. And in today's world, in fact, I looked up the number before I came here, of the 320 million Americans, the active military right now is 1.4 million.
Okay.
But anyway, it's like 0.5% of Americans are invested in the military.
Compared to when you got out?
And everybody was subject to the draft at that time.
True.
And so there's a disconnect. And maybe it's a good thing, but there's definitely a disconnect between our military and the average citizen.
Mm-hmm. You said that you never talked about this before, but what about, did you go into school groups or veteran groups?
No. I had applied to, well, my only active involvement right now is with Rolling Thunder. When I returned, I joined the VFW in Kearney, New Jersey. My wife's uncle, who was in the 4th Infantry Division in the Second World War, he brought me there. But even though he was active in that group, and I was welcome, but there was a limitation to that. The VFWs at the time, that was a clubhouse that the Second World War veterans had put together for themselves, and I was a little surprised that they did not welcome Vietnam veterans. And I wasn't sure if that was really the case, and so when I moved to Glen Gardner years later, I joined the VFW there, and it was the same kind of a thing.
Oh.
And so...
what about American Legion?
I never tried for the American Legion. I thought that the VFW was more appropriate for me.
Okay.
And so after that, I really didn't have any desire to be involved in any of the veterans groups. And then I was watching C-SPAN one Memorial Day, and I saw Rolling Thunder, and So I thought that, might be worth looking into. And as a matter of fact, I saw people being interviewed at the Rolling Thunder event that were wearing the 129th Assault Helicopter Company patch. And so, it kind of renewed my interest. And so I did join Rolling Thunder. That's 12 years ago. And my experience there has been very good. We go to the Lions Veterans Hospital once a month, and we alternate between visiting the PTSD and the nursing home. And so when we go to the nursing home, we play bingo with the veterans there. And good time is had by all. We bring food. And then for PTSD, we also bring food, but that's just a visit, and we just kind of commiserate with the people there.
Mm-hmm.
Rolling Thunder is very active in veterans affairs in general. And one of the remarkable things about Rolling Thunder is, it's a 501c3. And of the money that is taken in by Rolling Thunder, it's like about 3% that's spent on overhead. There's an annual audit that the government insists upon. And so that's where most of our money is spent, other than for veterans. Nobody in the organization gets paid. It's all volunteers. And so, I like the fact that they do so much, and yet compared to other 501c3s whose board members and administration gets very well paid, none of that goes on in Rolling Thunder. And I'm very proud of how Rolling Thunder serves the veterans.
When you joined, did you own a motorcycle?
Yeah, I did, but I had a motorcycle from the time I was 21 until my oldest daughter was born. And then I decided to get rid of that motorcycle at that time. And then years later, when I joined Rolling Thunder, I bought the bike I have today. And but I'll be quick to point out that Rolling Thunder, you don't have to have a motorcycle, you don't have to ride a motorcycle, you don't have to be a veteran, you just have to believe in their mission statement. And so a lot of our best members are not riders and are not veterans.
Oh, I see. And also it made me think, when you mentioned the time frame of when you did join, it was after 9/11.
Right. 9/11 did, over the years I would put an American flag out in front of my house, and it wasn't there all the time. But after 9/11, I've had my flag out since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that should have been a wake-up call for America. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that, we're going in the direction I'd like to see us go right now. But 9/11 kind of brought up some of the patriotism in me.
Do you have any kind of message for future generations, like your children's generations, about the importance of peace?
Well,
And that war maybe is not the answer, or?
well, peace, when I go to church on Sundays, we talk about peace.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I like most about, I'm a Roman Catholic, about the Catholic faith. Unfortunately, peace is seen as the desire for peace is seen as a weakness to much of the world. And right or wrong, that's just the way it is. And we have people in this world who would kill us just for who we are. And so as much as I love peace and I want peace for my granddaughter and that whole generation, I'm not naive enough to think that just because I want peace, peace is going to happen.
Okay.
And I think that when you saw the position that America took with the Marshall Plan after the Second World War, and the contributions that America made to world peace was extraordinary. Never before have countries been conquered and then given their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
If it's happened, it didn't happen on the scale that it happened after the Second World War. And so there's a benevolence there that sadly I don't think we could ever expect if we were defeated by an enemy. America did it right, and that's why I'm proud to be an American.
Mm-hmm. It's very beautiful. Before we look at your items that you brought today, Ted, I want to say that I'm honored and humbled that you're here today.
Thank you.
You spoke to me of your sacrifice and contribution that you made in service to your country. Thank you, Ted, and God bless you.
Thank you for having me.
Good job.
Thanks. Yo, you gonna record that? Okay.
Yes.
Guess I'll.
Who put this together?
Now, my friend Harvey, who's depicted right here. This is my friend Kenny. Yeah, the uniform I wore one time when I left SeaTac Air Base is I had the pockets taken off of it and sewed them onto my vest and my epaulets, and so some remnant of my uniform. Now, as far as this goes, my friend Harvey put it together, so he put in the pictures that meant something to him. Over here, Sergeant Rohina, he's the supply sergeant for the 129th, and he's quite a character. It was good working for him, but yeah, he was just quite a character. This young man is named Sung, and if I have any regrets, it's what happened to the civilian population of Vietnam when we left. People like Sung, who was probably just a year or two after I left, he was probably draft age for Vietnam. So I don't know what might have happened to that young man. There's no way to ever find out, I suppose. Okay. But I love that kid, and sad to think of what might have happened to him. This fellow is Jerry Darpa. He was the company clerk from Bronx, New York, graduated college, was drafted, landed in the 129th, and I knew him for a time after the war. I hadn't been in touch recently. Dan Kemp, individual from Ohio, and he was in my hooch. I knew him for the time I was there. Nice kid. This is Hung, another Vietnamese. Him and Sung, they helped us in logistics. And Miss Mai, what we call a hooch maid, she would do laundry and things like this. And so we had indigenous personnel that helped us, which was really kind of nice. Charlie Roberson clowning around, having a paintbrush in his hand there. Harvey Hirsch, a gung-ho picture of him with a bayonet in his mouth. This fella, Clyde, he was in the, we call it the gun platoon. He flew on one of the UE gunships, and he was a door gunner, crew chief. And he left he extended his tour in Vietnam for 6 months. He got a 30-day break to go home. And after that leave, he came back, and he was like a different guy than when he left. And eventually, he was found near the border to Thailand. He had abandoned his post, and they found him in the jungles. He was, they think he was trying to link up with the North Vietnamese. When they found him, they brought him back. The only secure area we had on our compound was the arms room. And so we took all of the guns and ammunition out of one of the connexes, and we kept them in this shipping container for about 3 days. But, you know, we kept them comfortable. I mean, I was guarding this fella. It was just the weirdest thing. And then eventually the CID, the investigation group in the military, took him away. I don't know what happened to him. I think he probably got a dishonorable discharge.
Right.
This fellow's Tim Gerber, and quick story about Tim. Really great guy. I was only ever shot twice, both times in the head, both separate incidents, and both times by Tim. And the first time, he
Oh my God.
detonated an M79 grenade, and I still have a fragment in my chin from that incident. And
Do you want to tell the story? It hit a tree, or?
well, yeah, he hit a tree branch close by, and when it was an aerial explosion nearby, and I didn't think that it stuck, but it did, and so I have that little souvenir from Tim. And then a second time when I was in the arms room, and actually it was Charlie Robertson who was returning an M16 to the arms room, and when he came up to the cage, he said, "Hey, Ted, I'm bringing back this M16. I said, "Well, did you clear it, Charlie?" And he said, "I did." So I said, "Okay, just leave it on the counter." My hands were all greasy and everything. So he walked away. A minute later, Tim comes in, and he goes, "Oh, M16." And he picks up, and boom! And it shot a hole through the top of the cage. And when this fragment ricocheted, it came off the tin roof, and it cut my ear.
Wow.
And so after having heard this explosion, everybody came running in to see what happened, and I'm bleeding from the ear, and it was bleeding pretty good. And Tim Gerber standing there like he didn't know what the hell happened. Either did I. But yeah, so anyway, it was, you know, nothing came of it. But
You're very lucky.
My friend Tim.
Yes.
I gotta go look that guy up.
You stayed friends after that, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know, none of it was intentional, and
Oh God.
yeah, so.
What happened to the guy who left it there and said he
Nothing.
cleared it?
Well, you know, we never made an issue of it because I didn't want to see somebody get
Okay.
reported for something like that, and it was no harm done. So.
And let's talk about you in the picture. We didn't say that was you.
Oh, this is me with one of the captured AK-47s, and we had gone down to the range, and you surprised me with that video that you found. That was probably that same day.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, so we would go down to the range and just, ostensibly to test weapons that had been repaired and such, but it was really, you know, we just emptied out as much ammunition as we could, and I'm about half deaf today for the reason that I probably shouldn't have been that close to that many explosions.
Have you ever been to the VA?
No, well,
Oh, okay.
to visit the veterans, but not,
Oh, I see.
yeah, not to be administered.
Not for yourself. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the work that you do, too, for our veterans. It's very
You're
admirable.
welcome. That's
Good job.
appreciated.
Oh, we forgot this.
Oh, well, now, yeah, started running out of room on the vest for patches, and Jane Fonda, American Trader bitch,
Oh, my goodness.
is, I put her to good use. I use her to carry my my Rolling Thunder card, And she's like an object of hate for us.
Right.
And so I don't have very much hate in my heart, but whatever I do have, I direct toward her.
I see.
Appropriately so.
Yes.
And then, just what you would associate with Rolling Thunder, different. I am a board member.
Yes.
And
Let's talk about your patches that you mentioned earlier. Do you have the 129th on there?
yes, it was the 129th.
Oh, it's the same as in the
Right. Yeah.
the collage. And then let's talk about Aviation Brigade, 1st Aviation Brigade.
The 1st Aviation Brigade, of course, the various companies of, such as the 129th, they constitute that brigade. And the role, it's either airborne artillery with gunships or troop movement, and that's accomplished with the UE, we call it Slick, or the Chinook helicopter. And so, the 1st Aviation Brigade was it's represented by this patch right here, and I was very fortunate to be assigned to the 1st Aviation Brigade, as it turns out.
Underneath your patch on your right side, can you talk about the ribbons?
Oh, this here?
Yeah.
Well, these are the Vietnam. This is the Vietnam campaign ribbon, and
That's your can opener, isn't it?
oh yeah, a P38 can opener.
Oh, okay.
I had one of those left over, and stuck that on there. But each of the military's ribbons would represent a campaign or something, and I don't know if one of these might be the Tet counteroffensive, but it's not specific to me. I never did get my full complement of ribbons, but I wasn't decorated for anything except those, those things that you would associate with just being in a certain place at a certain time.
And you weren't treated for your cut ear?
No.
I take it.
No, I didn't seek any treatment, and
And it's okay now?
oh yeah, yeah.
You were very lucky.
I was.
Yeah.
Yes, very
Oh
fortunate.
my goodness. All right, well, I'm very happy to have had you here today, Ted.
Okay.
Thank you.